All right, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when and where you are joining us from today for this disciples counseling and coaching session. My name is Rick. I am coming to you today from, had to think for a sec here, from the His Purpose Room here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Praise the Lord. And if you are following via YouTube or if you're here within the Fishbowl or Zoom platform, feel free to use the comment section, the chat section as well. With any questions, comments, concerns, or insights you may have on today's topic. Okay, we have a promo here. Get your copy of the Covenant Home. Did I sell it? Well, I don't know. Get your copy today via Amazon, Target, Walmart, etc. The Covenant Home, brought to you by Disciples. All right, and today's topic is bringing light to perception, cognitive distortion versus clarity. And the essential question to lead us today, how do distorted thoughts shape our behavior? And what does it look like to bring our perception back into alignment with truth? Because we are a people of truth, right? And when there's a misalignment, we have the teshuva process of returning to the Lord. And what does that look like specifically in contrast to the darkness that is distortion or cognitive distortion? And here's our central claim for today. Transformation begins at the level of perception, right? So when our thoughts are aligned with truth or light, behavior follows naturally. But when perception is distorted or darkness, misalignment in actions are truly inevitable, right? And these areas need healing. So we don't possibly explicitly say it, in Disciples in Recovery and some of the work that we do, but His table ministry is one of healing. Maybe I do explicitly say it. I don't know. Someone correct me. Here's the biblical anchor for today. It's out of Matthew 6:22. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. All right. Absolutely. There's a golden thread tie there to Torah for sure. All right. Our learning objectives by the end of this session, as participants, we should be able to identify common cognitive distortions. We won't cover them all, but and also explain how inaccurate perceptions can influence, of course, primarily our emotions that are um, developed into feelings and our decision making from that and behaviors before any outward actions occur. So this is, you know, um, predicated on the origin of our decision making and our behaviors. Secondly, all right, I got lost in my thought there. I was going to go down a rabbit hole. Let's not. All right. Secondly, we should be able to analyze real life scenarios, right? And we apply, the scriptures like a medicine, right? So when we are confronting these distortions, we're going to apply today the expose the thought framework, distinguishing between assumptions, distortions, facts, and truth-based interpretations. If you're a step ahead of me, and you're thinking of, cognitive behavioral application and strategies, and then you would be accurate. All right. Third, to apply these biblical and really and psychological principles of discernment to replace distortion or distorted thinking with truth aligned perspectives, right? That promote emotional health, spiritual growth, and behavioral alignment. Let us be led by Yeshua, in these moments, right? Whatever that mat is at the pool of Bethesda, for us to, name the mat, and the reason is there's a reason why we pick it up, right? It's for others to witness, right? That we have authority over that mat, and not to just to spiritually bypass as though the mat doesn't exist, right? It exists. Many of us have been laying on that mat or even marrying the mat, and in terms of covenant with that, or identity, I should say, in that distortion. All right, let's get this started. Section 1, distorted thinking. So let's define this first, right? Distorted thinking can look like all these areas. First, interpreting situations through fear, a lens of fear instead of truth. And we may know where that lens of fear originates, right? And so let's do the work and go back and apply the blood of Christ to the origin of that situation. Secondly, distortion or distorted thinking many times assumes motives without evidence. And we bypass all the evidence, and, you know, um, to be in these cycles of hurt, right? And distorted thinking is the cycles love to exist, right? So our job here is to break those cycles and heal them. Third, to magnify problems or minimizing responsibilities as well. All right. So now that we have, a working definition, let's get into some of the perception here. So when perception is distorted, behavior follows that distortion. It becomes the lead, right? Light then, in this context, is not simply a moral understanding, right? It is a cognitive clarity, right? So we have revelation during this time because we could see, right? All right. Moving right along. Again, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, insights, feel free to use the comment section there on YouTube, and as well as here, you can use the chat. A lot of us are at work today. Section 2 is common cognitive distortions, otherwise known as darkness in thought. So here it is. Number 1, catastrophizing. This is the inner dialogue, right? This is going to ruin everything, would be an example. And this is marked by assuming the worst possible outcome and treats it as inevitable, right? So we get our paintbrush here and we just paint the whole situation, with this perception. This could be a setback, a mistake, a conflict, a moment of disappointment, or a series of moments. Is mentally magnified into a disaster. And I love the word magnified because we're honed in here, we're focused, we're held captive, right, by that mistake, right, by that conflict. In contrast to evaluating the situation realistically. And if we're newer in recovery, as we do, um, as we work in many different types of recovery circles, then the impulse control is maybe not prevalent at this time, right? A few months in, or even a couple years in. The mind jumps from problem to catastrophe, right? And that jump could be, at light speed, as they say. All right. This pattern often increases anxieties, fears. I would I would say reinforces them, right? And emotional overwhelm because the perceived threat becomes much larger than actual circumstances. And we caution, anyone listening today, don't gaslight yourself, right? And just not everything is a distortion. And that's why we apply a structured and a structured approach, right? And a surrendered approach to the circumstances. Second one, number two, is all or nothing thinking. If I failed once, I'm a failure, right? We apply that one, that one experience, and again, we paint other situations with that one experience. All or nothing thinking is a cognitive distortion in which people view themselves or others or situations in extremes, right? There is no middle ground. And so if we witness this, it, a single mistake is interpreted as total defeat, right? We may be or have witnessed this in our families and our with our loved ones, caretakers, different environments. Right? We may have witnessed the opposite of this as well, which is a conversation we could have for sure. And the setback, and one setback becomes evidence of really personal inadequacy. So now we're talking about shame identity, right? When the mistake is internalized, right? And adopted as identity. That's why we break these patterns, because we know whose we are, right? We don't belong to the mistake. All right. This pattern ignores growth, progress many times, and also the reality that that most humans experiences exist on a spectrum, right? And we could be in that season or that day, keep it real here, where we're just like challenged, and we make mistake after mistake, or we don't see things as we should. Perhaps it's cyclical. It's a certain time of the year that makes sense, right? If we have experienced a loss, or a trauma during a specific time of the year, then we have an association there, right? And to recognize that as well, that needs healing every year as well, right? I feel like I'm talking to myself. Uh, all right. So instead of seeing failure as an event, the person begins to see failure as an identity. And again, we're speaking to the differences, I feel, or the progression of shame, a shame identity there. All right, number three. I think we have four or five. Number three is mind reading. The inner dialogue could look like this, sound like this. They must think negatively about me. So mind reading. This is when a person assumes that they know what others are thinking without sufficient evidence. Now, and there's a balance here, right? We could pick up on some cues, and some of us are, I think, more just emotionally intelligent. I've been around people who really could pick up on subtleties and body language, especially, right? But assuming what other people our thinking and really reinforcing some of these distortions is time to break that cycle. So rather than, relying on facts, the mind fills in the gaps with interpretations. And I'll stop here for a sec because we are attempting to make a coherency or a coherent a situation into a coherent thought, right? And interpret that situation, right, depending on what it is. And we'll have a couple of examples today to walk through. And these are often negative, right? And they could be on the opposite end of the spectrum. They could be absolutely, it could be distorted and be a positive, right? Filling in the gaps with um, delusions of grandeur and things of that nature. We're not going in that direction today. We'll reserve that for a later date in some of the narcissistic or tendencies of narcissism, which I could personally relate to. So there's some confession there for me. All right, if you're still with us. So here's how it could look, right? A neutral facial expression, perhaps a delayed response, a brief comment, or even lack of comment or lack of feedback can quickly be interpreted as rejection, criticism, disapproval, removal of love. Are you angry with me? Are you, you know, and so we're working something that has not been healed, right? We're still trying to process that something, and this is the point, right? If we talk about that Galatians progression of the flesh versus the spirit, is we are attempting typically to confront an area of our lives, and we're in that loop of confrontation and may not know that, right? Yeah, that came out right. It did. All right. So this pattern often increases anxiety, insecurities, self-consciousness versus self-awareness is a discussion that we have often around here, and in disciples in recovery, as well as recognition being that primary foundational element of teshuva. So we want to develop self-awareness, but not to the point of self-consciousness, right? It could be so paralyzing. Because people begin reacting to assumptions rather than reality. So we have some good working references today, right? So if you're taking notes or you have experience in these areas and some psychoeducation, things like that, then this is a reteach for you. Uh, Relationships, and here it is, right? Here's the cost. Here's the consequences. Is relationships will suffer when we imagine judgments are treated as facts, right? Leading to withdrawal, defensiveness, unnecessary conflicts. Right? They interrupt momentum, they interrupt the day, they interrupt ministry, they interrupt our covenant with husbands, wives, children's, and are very destructive, right? And so we're here to make, I feel, to diagnose, you know, through the Lord with some of these teachings, but also to heal, right? We're not just going to lay there on the mat. All right, number 4, emotional reasoning. I feel it, so it must be true. And all these are landing for me, for sure. All right. Emotional reasoning is a cognitive distortion in which a person treats emotions as proof. All right. I feel it, so it's true. Proof of reality. And if we've been in this loop, this cycle, again, if we've been held captive by this for years, the tendency, in my opinion, is to be, isolated, because we don't want to experience that emotion, right? And so our boundaries may be more like fortresses, So I think that's one way to kind of assess the situation, right? Instead of viewing feelings as important signals that need interpretation. Emotions become the evidence upon which conclusions are based. And, we live in an era where, you know, our emotions have been weaponized. This is some commentary by me. Our emotions have been weaponized to keep us in the loop of attention, right? Hold our attention. So, you know, a fear, especially a fear loop. If you're on social media and you're constantly just vigilant of other people because of that fear loop, then some of these distortions are so amplified through social media. So be just cognitive, be aware of, cognizant of your social media, the effect of social media on these distortions, right? Because that mood could turn into identity. It really can. Um, and when that happens, it's really difficult to break out of that loop. Hopefully, you have a friend that will tell you about it. All right, here we are. So where fear becomes proof of danger, right? Guilt becomes proof of wrongdoing, and insecurity becomes proof of inadequacy. There's a lot of work to do with this. So while emotions provide valuable information about our internal experience, again, don't gaslight yourself and just be able to process those emotions and ground, use those techniques. They are not always accurate reflections of external reality. Right? And so, however we process our emotions, and maybe that's you know the precursor and the prerequisite, or to this work that we're talking about today, is to be able to have that safe place to process those feelings and know where they're coming from, right, and what direction uh, they're leading you to, right? Because many times, these emotions are signals of something, and so we can align those, of course, with our Lord, and head in the direction that's necessary, kingdom direction. All right. Feelings can be influenced, of course, by stress, past experiences, fatigue, trauma, assumptions, or incomplete information. So, make note what perhaps is a lot of these intersecting, right? If we're not getting enough rest, if our diet is poor, if we're, you know, um, again, consuming so much social media or foods that we shouldn't. I'll raise my hand first, or at the time, and substance use, things of that nature. So all these areas really impact, of course, our central nervous system and just the way we interpret and experience life, right? When emotions are mistaken for facts, decisions may be driven more by perception than truth. And I think that's what we're saying today. Like, understand that that's could be your uh, experience, what you're going through, and also a family member, right? If you're supporting someone and there's just sudden mood swings or just that loop is really evident, then there is work to be done, right? And there's a direction to be headed towards. These distortions create a false reality that drives misaligned behavior. It becomes very evident in some seasons more than others, I feel. All right, so that should set a foundation for our integration insight. And so let's go back to the embodiment, right? And the embodiment, the teaching is through Torah, and the embodiment is in Yeshua, the Messiah. So let's start with Torah first, um, which is saying the same. Torah teaches a separation of light and darkness, and we won't go too deep into that teaching. I'm sure Disciples Academy does that very well. um, but we could make that statement today. And so again, we'll come to the bridge here is in cognitive behavioral therapy, right? It teaches identification of accurate versus distorted thoughts. So our next step, right, if we're supporting someone or we're doing the work ourselves, is you know um, if the Lord's provision is a therapeutic environment, a mental health professional, uh, a life coach, those kinds of things, maybe all of them, right? To be able to really reside in that space and seek the healing that you need. Right? All right. Both Torah and cognitive behavioral therapy, we're talking about, emphasize discernment at the level of perception. You don't correct behavior first, you correct what you believe is true. Right. And so we could use words as just simply truth or core beliefs, things of that nature as well, right? So here's the strategy that we'll walk out today. And we thank you for joining us via YouTube. Find us on Facebook, Disciples Counseling and Coaching, as well as the Disciples family, which is Disciples Academy, and also Disciples in Recovery. If you made it this far in the video, check us out. The strategy is expose the thought. And so the first step is one of recognition, right? It just follows that Teshuvah model to recall a recent emotional reaction. Right? There's no condemnation in recall. We are created to remember, right? And it's for a reason. So whether it was, mixed emotions, right? Anger, anxiety, um, perhaps um, a shame identity that's evident. Recall that specific reaction. Number two, trace or connect the dots. What thought came before that emotion? And so we're diagramming this, right? And there's several worksheets that you could find online, PDFs if you Google, right, and do a search specifically on cognitive behavioral therapy, and you'll find a plethora of PDFs to help you. Don't stop the video and go do that, or at least come back to it. All right. Anyways, open up another tab. All right. So yeah, step two is to trace what thought came before the emotion. Yeah, we have a lot of resources at our disposal, right? And third, the test. So is this thoughtfully true? Thoughtfully true, right? What evidence supports or contradicts it? And we could cite scripture, right? Lamentations is just a good book on testing for sure, and even a teshuvah process, I would argue. So once we've done that, we reframe, right, the thought with a truth-based perspective. And so if we're looking at the Galatians model, the Galatians progression is what we call it. This is where it is transformed into a spirit-led response, right? Or spirit-led thought. So, and then the behavior follows, right? So our first, we'll call it a case study here. Our first example, the unanswered text. You already know where I'm going here. All right. Pretty universal, I feel. Here's a scenario. We'll name this guy Greg. Sorry, Greg's out there. Greg sends a text to a close friend asking if they can meet for coffee, and several hours pass with no response. All right. So by the evening, Greg feels hurt, frustrated. We could maybe already start aligning some belief systems there, abandonment, things like that. He begins thinking, this person must be upset with me, or I probably did something wrong. I probably did something to offend. Or people always leave me when they get to know the real me, right? And you know, many of these may exist at the same time, right? We're stating some examples here. So the next day he withdraws, right? Here's the behavioral response. He withdraws and he avoids reaching out. So later he discovers his friend had been dealing with a family emergency and had not checked his phone. Checks out, right? And so here's the distortion, there may be other ones besides this one, but mind reading, jumping to conclusions over generalization, right? So we know that there's a distortion there. Um, and we're viewing this, of course, from our perspective, but I could relate. I've been Greg for sure. And so here's the darkness, right? The distorted perception is that Greg interpreted a lack of information as evidence of rejection. Right? So his belief system is one of rejection, right? That area needs healing. So this may be part of the healing as we go further along in our application here. Here's the light. The facts did not support his conclusions. The delayed response had nothing to do with him. Right? And he knows that after the fact, right? So here's the expose the thought strategy. Step one, as we said, we identify what emotion was Michael, excuse me, wasn't Michael. What emotion was Brother Greg experiencing? And, it could, of course, be anxiety, right, from someone not responding, right? What is the body telling Greg at this time? And we could, you know, probably understand this in our own respect. Hurt, right? And rejection. And so step two is to trace what thought preceded the emotion. And you could, of course, pause the video and write down what thought you feel preceded the emotion. We know the inner dialogue, right? He must be upset with me. And he goes into these negative core belief systems. People always leave me. Step three, the test. What evidence supports his thought? So we have to test, our own situation, right? And look for that evidence. Well, the friend had not responded. That is true. The friend did not respond. But what evidence contradicts this? And, we're just going to walk this out for a sec here. Uh, does this friend typically respond? Right? Is his experience with the friend one in which, yeah, he usually responds within an hour? So if he responds within an hour, this is the one time he hasn't responded. So most of the times he responds, right? And most of the time, most people respond. Right? They don't take 24 hours to respond, right? And if they do, then we have to rethink, you know, and just, mentally be prepared. Like, oh, I might not hear from this person for a day or two. And so here's the evidence: no conflict had occurred. Um, they weren't in any type of argument or anything like that. The friend had not said he was upset, so why go there? you know, he never said it. And it's something I teach all the time is, did someone literally say that, right? And other explanations were possible, right? And again, this isn't like to go into a different distortion from one distortion to another and say, oh, maybe something happened to him. And, we have to kind of be able to regulate our emotions in this moment, right? And speak truth into our current state, which is work in progress, right? But that's the key, is we're progressing that way. Step 4 is to replace the truth-based alternative, or to replace it with the truth-based alternative. So here's an example of something we could tell ourselves, or Greg could have told himself. I do not yet know why he has not responded. It may have nothing to do with me. I need more information before drawing conclusions. And, this is such a necessary component, is to speak and make this declaration aloud, right? We are created in the image of God. He speaks creation into life, right? And so we need to do the same unto ourselves and unto these new experiences and healing opportunities. The key insight: the darkness was not the unanswered text. The darkness was this distorted story that he created around the unanswered text. So this is, self-imposed, right? So there's nothing to really blame, but we could identify the source and heal the source, or the origin of that distorted story. It could be, it could stem from, not everything's a childhood experience, but it could stem from a previous experience, right? Where someone was missing or didn't answer, right? And we could paint the world with that experience. All right, we're going to take a 2-minute heat up coffee break here at Disciples Counseling and Coaching. And so we'll see you in a couple minutes here. Case study, pardon me, case study 2, the critical comment. So brace your inner critic for this one. Each of these really hit home for me. I just, want to kind of interject with my own teshuva process, both, the mind reading, especially that person, um, I call it pre-rejection, right? The person hasn't rejected me, but I'm already, you know, um, creating a distortion in the past. And that distortion was founded uh, on really an insecurity, based on a trauma response, and not really feeling safe with anybody. So there's a mistrust there that needed healing on my part, mistrust of really humanity. So And so that would be one area for me. And this one too, the critical comment, the inner critic. And so we'll do a couple specific teachings on the inner critic and really how to have authority over that inner critic through through the spirit of Messiah. So looking forward to that as well. All right. So the critical comment, Sarah, sorry, Sarah's gives a presentation at work and several co-workers compliment her afterward. All right, sounds good so far. One supervisor offers constructive feedback. Your content was excellent. Next time, try slowing down during the introduction. You may know where this is going, right? So here's Sarah, and she spends the rest of the day thinking, I completely failed. I'm terrible at public speaking. Everyone probably noticed how bad I was, especially in, you know, in that specific area. She becomes discouraged and starts avoiding future speaking opportunities. So we really see in this scenario the progression of the distortion, right? Where it originates in the situation or the event, and how, yeah, it's really destroyed other opportunities, right? So here's the cognitive distortion, the mental filter, right? Again, catastrophizing and or nothing thinking. The distorted perception or the darkness is that Sarah focused exclusively on one area of improvement while ignoring all the other evidence of success, right? I could relate, especially in the past. The light being the feedback identified a growth opportunity and not a failure, right? And so if we could relate to these experiences, I would really suggest first, of course, pray for the discernment of how to go about this, but really identifying the recency of when we have had this experience ourselves, right? And it could be a journal, and if you want to call it inner critic, we're not giving it power, we're naming it, right? We have to name the enemy, so when it's in front of us, we're able to confront that enemy, right? So we're actually disarming when we name. So let's apply the expose the thought strategy here. So step one, identify what emotions was Sarah experiencing. And the first time we did this workshop, people were pretty spot on, right? And I think we all could relate to Sarah, or many of us can at least. So embarrassment, right? And the body, will communicate. Our central nervous system will communicate through our physiological, right? Um, you know, might feel warm, like start sweating. The flight response could be pretty evident here. Discouragement, right? Step two is to trace what thought preceded the emotion. So again, we're really talking about a belief system here, and we call them negative core beliefs and positive core beliefs, right? And for those reasons, some are positive, reinforce something positive in our life, right? So in this case, I completely failed, or I'm terrible at public speaking. And step three then is to test what evidence supports this thought. And so she received one corrected suggestion. That is true. However, look at all the evidence that contradicts it. One, she's employed. Like, so, she's doing all those things, right, to be employed, and may have a collegiate background and licenses and things of that nature as well. So those are areas that we don't know. It's not part of the story, right? Um, but in our own experience, right, our own, we could name some of those as well, right? And also the supervisor praised her content. Like he started with the praise first, right? And his feedback was appropriate. So the tone and those kinds of things we don't know, but um, those are areas that we should note in our personal experience. Like, what's a person's tone? What's their history with us? Are they always saying we need to improve in an area? And we might want to confront them and ask, like, hey, I notice every time we speak, um, in the context of work, then you're giving me a lot of feedback, and you may have a boundary for that as well, and say, could you, depending on your relationship, with that person, but if it's a spouse, if it's a coworker, if it's a person you're in relationship with, you may communicate what that boundary may be. Like, hey, give me three positives, and maybe one needs to improve, right? Um, and that's appropriate, right? So, all right, so here it is. The supervisor praised her content. Coworkers gave positive feedback. It looks like she just bypassed that, and she completed the presentation successfully. She didn't like walk out mid presentation. So she received some good feedback. So that's how we counteract, right? We counteract with the truth, and to reinforce the truth in our life. It could look like a gratitude journal. It could look like writing positive feedback on our whiteboard or mirror, you know, and just things that we know about ourselves that are true, that are proven every day. Right? I'm on time every day. Things of that nature. So, all right, number four is to replace with the truth-based alternative, and that's kind of where we're leading to, right? The presentation went well. I received positive feedback and one suggestion that can help me improve next time. And I think that's the key for the last one is that is a transformed renewal of the mind, right? What when it says in Romans to be renewed, to renew the mind, this is one way that could look, right? Is to transform what was said, how we interpreted what was said into a truth and a statement that gives life, right? So I just love that Galatians progression that we talk about. It's really indicative and founded on that. So we'll try to do a little more with that as well. All right. Growth mindset, right? Here's the key insight. Correction does not become harmful because it is difficult. And the correction becomes harmful when distorted thinking turns growth into failure. So, when we're surrounded with people who are going to support our growth, they may interject with a needs to improve, right? And that's not ultimately negative, or just may not be negative at all. All right. Again, my apologies. It's not Michael. Poor Michael's, man. I threw two people in there. Both Greg and Sarah demonstrate a key principle of CBT, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy and spirit led discernment. All right. And we're integrating these two today. The event was not the primary problem. The interpretation of the event is what created the emotional and behavioral response. In both cases, one, the event was neutral or incomplete, right? They didn't have enough information. And secondly, the perception became distorted, right? And that's the premise today is that the distortion itself is darkness, right? And just a cautionary comment here, don't outsource the distortion into blaming and creating a spirit that doesn't exist or may not exist in your life, right? And say, oh, that's the spirit of, whatever it is. You're outsourcing it at that point, and it's really a blame shifting situation. It just looks righteous, but it isn't. So stop. All right. The distortion produced emotional suffering, and we're, as followers, as disciples, we will encounter suffering in our life and be transformed by our response, right, to that suffering. Clarity emerged when the thought was examined and tested. So there's a process to that. Examine and test. Examine and test. Sounds like Lamentations, right? Let us examine our ways and test them. We literally are receiving direction on how to confront cognitive distortions, among other areas. So this reflects the spirit-led movement from darkness to light. And it's important to note the progress here, right? If you get into a place where you're trying to do some of this work and just frustration settles in, and some of the terms, may not make sense, or, seek some counsel, seek some therapeutic community, seek, first of all, the Lord's will, and his provision, right? Go collect the manna, step out of your tent, go out there, collect the manna that's yours. That's the Lord's provision for you for the day, and do that every day. So that's what I'll say today. Our reflection questions, there's a few. How do distorted thoughts influence your behavior without you realizing it? So this takes some work to answer this question, because first, it's, predicated on identification, or recognition, I should say, and confession, really, and our part in the distortion, right? And having responsibility for our part in the distortion. Secondly, which distortion do you tend to default to under stress, right? Mine, first of all, my response under stress is typically a flight response. Very rarely is it a fight. But those aren't fixed responses, and they weren't fixed in the past either. So I recognize the response, and typically, if I'm being specific in one specific area, I should speak to the distortion of feeling rejected. Was founded on me applying the origin of a series of feelings of rejection from my childhood, and none of them were really valid. None of them were true. So I had to heal the origin of that time, feeling bypassed, feeling overlooked, and and so when I sat down and did the work, it was really offering forgiveness. Um, was a massive part of healing that, and I had the revelation not too long ago that anytime that I was truly rejected, because we still can be rejected, right? So, but anytime I really was rejected or overlooked, it was the Lord, propelling me to where He wanted me. So, if um, we have to confront these realities that, yeah, we'll be fired, we'll be, um, you know, the facts, right? That will witness certain things in our life. We'll have accidents and so on. But those need to be held captive and healed in the moment. So, all right, rabbit hole. Secondly, what changes when you pause and examine your thinking before reacting? It's a highly difficult thing to put into practice. Takes time. I think there's still definitely, I have so many lapses between the pause and the examination, and to take accountability for those. But the changes, that's where the fruit is. All right. If we do have questions and comments today, I know many of us are literally at work. You could contact me, Rick, at Disciples, Rick Flores at disciplesinrecovery.life. And also, if you find any of our teachings and of our work and are feel called to contribute, right? You could scan that QR code and make a contribution. And I'll just say what those contributions really look like. One is we provide, psychoeducation founded in the Torah, um, for the local community here in Colorado Springs. Also, in treatment centers and some of the correctional facilities, and that's the mission for us. Is to set captives free and to be led to do so, and not thinking that we could go out and do that ourselves. This is a spirit led and spirit founded. When I say spirit, I mean in Messiah um, ministry. And so, if you want more information, just about like how we operate, again, feel free to contact myself. You could also do so via Facebook as well, messenger, emails, things like that. So, all right. Well, we thank you for joining us for this almost an hour. I'm a little long winded for sure, but that's the way I am. So, all right. We love you and